Okay, so I went to the grocery store after my midwife appointment today to get a bunch of stuff for breakfast freezer meal prep. However, I did that, but they also had whole chickens at a really good price. So I grabbed 4 of those, and hopefully over the next few days I can just make them and make more broth. And then we also want to start jerky for this week and do a little bit of other food prep type things. So I have a lot to get done. I'm gonna make a list quick of things in order of most time consuming to less time consuming. That way I'll start at the top and work my way down, because things are gonna need to cook while I'm doing the simple projects. So let's do it.
Real quick, before we get into anything major, I wanted to show you a few of the things that I picked up from the grocery store. Again, a lot of these things are for breakfast freezer meal prep, but I also couldn't help but grab some veggies since I knew I would need some for the bone broth, and I also had some on hand. So some of these veggies I just plan to use some for the bone broth and then freeze the rest, and I'll show you the entire process today as I'm preparing these vegetables, as I'm using stuff for the bone broth, and then what I do to freeze my vegetables and keep them fresh and full of flavor while they're frozen. Okay, after I shed a few tears over these onions, it was back to my list. The list really helps me keep things straight and remember what I'm doing so I stay on task. I am 28 weeks pregnant this week, so you're going to see me waddling around quite a bit in this video, and also just stopping to remember what I'm in the middle of, like I did just now. So top of my list is to get the chicken into my Dutch oven so that I can put it in the oven and get it cooking. Now listen, if you have never made a whole chicken like this before, I don't want you to be intimidated. It is so easy. You will regret not doing it sooner. So I put a little bit of water to cover the bottom of my Dutch oven, and then I put the chicken in, and then I put seasoning on top of the chicken. And then after that, I took some veggie scraps and I put those in the pot as well. So I put the scraps from the celery that I just cut, and I put in some baby carrots that I had in my fridge for about 3 weeks that I needed to use up. And then I also took parts of the onion that I won't use, and I put that in there as well. And that adds amazing flavor. So don't throw those out. Don't put them to waste. Just throw them into your Dutch oven with your chicken. You'll see here, I decided to make a bag of the rest of the veggie scraps because I have 3 more chickens in the fridge to cook. So I knew that I would use these scraps again in a couple days. So I put them all into a bag, and then when I go to make the next chicken, all of the prep is already done. The only thing I need to do is put the seasoning on the chicken and then throw this bag of scraps in, and I will be all set to go. It's going to save a ton of time. While I was already getting the scraps together, I might as well make a whole bag just for the next chicken. I put that in the fridge and I'll store that until I need it. The other option is you could freeze those scraps and pull them out when you go to make another chicken. So while I had all of the stuff out to cut veggies, I figured I might as well prepare these carrots to be a freezer veggie side that I could pull out at any time, or I could even use postpartum as a side for dinner. So while I was bringing that water to a boil to make those veggies, I checked on my chicken and it was absolutely perfect. It smelled so good. I tasted the meat and it was so delicious. So I pulled all of the meat off of the bones, and I just did this using a fork and a knife. Like I said, making a chicken like this is so easy. I couldn't even believe how easy it was the first time that I did it. So it's definitely worth trying, and you can always check the chicken periodically to make sure that you're not overcooking it. You can stick your fork in with a knife and see how red the meat is still. You can even use a meat thermometer if that makes you feel more comfortable, but I promise you that you can do it. Favorite part about making chicken this way is how easy it is to also use the bones for bone broth. So I feel like we get really good high quality chicken out of it, but we also get high quality bone broth, and I can control the ingredients in both of them. So this chicken, like I said, it was so delicious, and I'll show you, it just was falling apart. But also we get really good, delicious bone broth that I can can up and I can save for my family throughout the winter months. And I'll show you the process of doing that as well. So back to the veggies, I quickly threw these carrots into the boiling water for 2 minutes. Then I took them out and I rinsed them off with cold water. This process is called blanching, and this is what keeps your vegetables good in the freezer. So I put it into a freezer bag, which I already had labeled, and when I'm ready to use these, I will pull them out and let them sit in the fridge overnight, and then I probably will roast them in the oven because I really love the taste of roasted carrots. I did the same thing with the celery that I cut up earlier. I had blanched that as well, and I'll store that in the freezer to throw into some soups this winter. And then I put water over the bones in my Dutch oven and I let it sit on low heat while I cleaned up the kitchen, crossed off my list, and then I turned off the heat before I went to bed. I let that pot sit overnight on the stove and then brought it back up to a boil the next morning and turned it down to low heat once it boiled for the rest of the morning. I went on a quick Goodwill trip while my husband was home, keeping an eye on the pot, and then I came back and checked on it and it looked so good. So I decided to strain it out, and that bone broth is going to go into jars for me to can. So I did a quick wipe down of my sink, and then I washed out my jars very thoroughly. And this is very important in the canning process to make sure your jars and your lids and your rings are all clean, and I'll show you each part of that. Once I had the clean jars, I was able to transfer the bone broth into these jars. And 1 chicken worth of bone broth made about 4.5 cans. So I processed 4 of them in the canner, and then I saved the other part of the broth in the fridge. And it was actually perfect because my mom ended up needing some broth this week, so I was able to give that to her for her to use. In the past, I have made bone broth from rotisserie chicken bones. If you're not comfortable making a chicken yet, that's another good way to at least get some bone broth. It's definitely not as nutrient dense as cooking the chicken on your own and controlling the ingredients. And so it is an option if you decide to do that. I used to do that and freeze the broth. And then when I was ready to use it, I would put it right in the soup pot and let it warm up until it turns into liquid. And then I would make my soup from there. But I'm really excited about having these cans of bone broth. I know if my freezer goes out, I have some nutrient dense broth that I can still use, and it will be good on the shelf for a while. If you know nothing about canning, that's totally fine. It is something that you can do as a beginner in the kitchen, or even as somebody who has a lot of experience in the kitchen but has never learned how to can. I definitely recommend looking into it because it's a very useful skill to have. And I have found that it's even better to talk with people that do can so that you can learn things from them and how they do it. Sometimes when you read instructions online, it's very confusing if you don't know the terminology. At least that's my experience. I was very confused when I started and didn't fully understand everything. And so I would highly recommend finding people that do can or joining some groups on Facebook. I'm even willing to help teach you how to can. I'll teach you all that I know, but know that I still have a lot to learn. But it's a really fun process, and it almost makes you feel very connected to the food that you're making in your kitchen, and the long process and the late nights and the early mornings is so worth the outcome. So if you are familiar with canning, I processed my jars at 11 pounds for 25 minutes, and as you can see, these are quart jars, and I did 4 in the canner, and it looks so good. I'm very happy with how it turned out and happy that none of my jars broke. Before we end our video, I wanted to show you a few things that I got from Goodwill that morning. I found a pair of weights, which was awesome, but I also found some things in the kitchen to make my life a little bit easier. The price of mason jars was way too high. I can buy them cheaper for new, but here are a few things that I got which I know will be big tools for me in the kitchen, and also a toy for Hatchie. This is where we are at so far with our canning this fall, and I'm super excited for all that we have stored away for this winter, and we will continue to share our cooking and canning. We appreciate you guys being along for the ride.